Okay, quick. Name the most recognizable polling organizations in the country. Name the ones that come to mind first. Give you a second. What'd you come up with? Gallup, probably, maybe Zogby, maybe NBC News Wall Street Journal, or PPP, or ABC News Washington Post. Okay, here's one for you. American Express. Polls by American Express. Did you know American Express did polling? American Express does polling. And apparently, at least in some cases, American Express only polls rich people. You have to have a six-figure income to even be polled by American Express, to even be asked questions in the American Express poll. And what exactly do those rich folks want when American Express asks them questions? It turns out those rich folks want rich people to be taxed more. The latest American Express poll, done by a research firm called the Harrison Group, found that 65% of people who have at least six-figure incomes, 65% of them would support tax increases on people making $1 million a year or more. So, A, American Express does polls of rich people. B, rich people want higher taxes on rich people. Want to know what the Tea Party wants right now? I have empirical information about what the Tea Party wants. This is not conjecture. This is not just my impression. I actually have empirical data about what the Tea Party wants. By a margin of 52 to 29, you want to know what the Tea Party wants? They want government action to ensure that millionaires don't pay lower taxes than people who aren't millionaires, otherwise known as the Buffett rule, otherwise known as what President Obama has been proposing for the last few weeks. The Tea Party, self-identified Tea Party members, support that idea by a 33-point margin. Want to know what Republicans want right now? Again, I have empirical information about this, no need to conjecture. By a margin of 66 to 17, by a 49-point margin, Republicans, like Tea Partiers, support government action to make sure millionaires don't pay lower taxes than non-millionaires. 66% of Republicans support the Buffett rule idea. You want to know what independents want right now? They want to raise taxes on millionaires. 65% of independents are for that. 28% opposed. That is a 37-point margin by which independents like the tax millionaires idea. You want to know what Americans overall support? By a margin of 81 to 17, wow! Americans overall would support a surtax on millionaires. 81% of Americans want that. The Beltway media has been denouncing President Obama's economic populism, saying an economic populist message doesn't appeal to a broad swath of the country. Is there a broader swath of the country than 81%? Right now, opinion polling on everybody in Washington is horrible. But when you ask people who cares about protecting the middle class, when you ask people who in Washington cares about protecting the middle class, President Obama beats Republicans on that score by 20 points. When you ask people, who do you trust more on jobs, President Obama beats the Republicans on that by 15 points. And by a 16-point margin over those who would say no, and by a raw majority, the country wants to pass President Obama's jobs bill. A jobs bill that would be financed by, drum roll please, taxing the rich, so that the rich don't pay less than everyone else, which again is the most popular idea in America since someone first suggested a cold drink on a hot day. It is so popular today that Democrats started kicking around renaming this idea that rich people should pay the same taxes as other people. Democrats today started kicking around the idea of renaming that whole idea the Romney rule, because they think it's that good for them, especially heading into an election year. This economic populist idea has so much support that Democrats are finally realizing that they could even use it to separate the vast majority of the American public who agree with this idea from Republicans in Congress who don't agree with it. The top Democrat in the Senate, Harry Reid, noted today that while a huge majority of Republicans across the country support this idea, this Buffett rule idea, the tax the rich idea, despite the fact that a huge majority of Republicans across the country support that idea, quote, none of them are in the Senate.
Their constituents, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and as I've already said, even the Tea Party, believe that their taxes should be just assessed on a fair basis. I would suggest that they're really not keeping in touch with their constituents.
The protests going on right now, not just in New York City, but also in Los Angeles, also in Chicago, also in Seattle, also all over the country. For the most part, these Occupy Wall Street events do not look like mainstream voting day political events. Direct action is usually like that, especially at the beginning of direct action campaigns. But even if these events don't necessarily look like mainstream events. Their message that big business and the financial industry and the richest 1% of Americans have not just taken everything for themselves, but they have ruined everything for the rest of the country and prevented anything from getting fixed, that message could not be more mainstream right now. Seriously. I mean, even the chairman of the Fed agrees with the Occupy Wall Street people.
I would just say very generally, I think people are quite unhappy with the state of the economy and what's happening. They blame, with some justification, the problems in the financial sector for getting us into this mess. And they're dissatisfied with the policy response here in Washington. And at some level, I can't blame them.
Occupy Wall Street, endorsed by the chairman of the Fed. I think that means it's mainstream. The Occupy Wall Street protests are just now settling in. And judging from the fact that these are now popping up all over the country, judging from their plans to stick it out for the long haul, it is worth noting that although these protests may not always look all that mainstream, thus attracting derision from mainstream media in a way that people will be embarrassed about in the long run, although these things may not look mainstream and although it may look like a lot of kids right now, the message of these events is as mainstream as anything gets in American politics today.